Welcome back to AGK's Vinyl Life with your host Anthony K. And this is part 2 of my Music of the James Bond Films video. The video actually ended up being an hour long, so I've decided to split it into 2 parts. So here's the continuation and conclusion of the music of the James Bond films on vinyl. Next up, we're going 1983, and once again, John Barry would return to score Octopussy. That's right. The 1983, the year with 2 Bond films again, like we had back in 1967, where we had 3 Bond-ish films, 3 Bond films in 67, with Casino Royale, OK Connery, and You Only Live Twice. 1983 would see a duel between Bond films, and this was Octopussy, scored by John Barry, and Rita Coolidge would sing the title track called All Time High. Rita Coolidge would sing the title track. This is the first Canadian pressing of that album, Octopussy, 1983. And also in 1983, Sean Connery would be talked into doing a remake of Thunderball by Kevin McClory in an independent studio, and Thunderball would be completely remade, calling it Never Say Never Again, the title coming from the fact that on Johnny Carson, Connery was quoted when asked if he would ever do another Bond film after Diamonds Are Forever. He said, never again. And so that's where they got the title, Never Say Never Again, because Connery did in fact return to challenge Moore, and it was the duel of versus Connery versus Moore in 1983 with a remake of Thunderball called Never Say Never Again. This is a first Japanese press. This album is probably one of my most valuable albums in the collection, in that this album was not released. I've never seen a U.S. pressing of, or North American pressing of Never Say Never Again. So this is really rare. And this music was done by Michel Legrand, a French composer. And of course, the title song was Never Say Never. There were 2 songs on here. Une Chanson d'Amour was a single, and Never Say Never Again, which was sung by Miss Lani Hall. And this is the Japanese version of Never Say Never Again, 1983. And then next up came 1985, and Roger Moore's last film, A View to a Kill, once again scored by John Barry. Once again, John Barry would do the score for this film, and there's some good pieces of music on it, but like now that we're in the 80s, the music became very orchestral. Still a great spin, still some great pieces of music on here. Not as good in my opinion as some of the other John Barry scorings, but still a great album, and one for your collection. And of course, this album spawned the massive hit by Duran Duran, A View to a Kill, the massive single by Duran Duran, and this is on the Capitol label. And there's the original 45 of A View to a Kill by Duran Duran, the original 7-inch single, first Canadian press. So that album, 1985, scored by John Barry. Then came 1987, and The Living Daylights, the first of the Timothy Dalton films, The Living Daylights, and this would be the last time that John Barry would score for the James Bond films, and this is a fantastic spin, All the songs on here are just fantastic. Really great sounding, really good flow to this album all the way through. John Barry did a fantastic job in scoring this last album for the films. And of course, The Living Daylights title track was sung by Aha. And there's the original 45 single. Aha would do the title track. It became a big popular hit. The Living Daylights, performed by Aha. This is 1987. And also singing on this film, it would be the first time they would would have an opening and closing theme song. So they had The Living Daylights performed by Aha, opening the film, and closing the film was a song called If There Was a Man, performed by The Pretenders. Chrissie Hynde and The Pretenders would perform the closing track, If There Was a Man. And they would also do a second song in the film by The Pretenders called Where Has Everybody Gone? So The Pretenders actually had 2 songs in this film. Great spin, absolutely great spin. 1977's The Living Daylights. Next up, License to Kill, 1989. And this would be the last album pressed on vinyl for years and years and years. The last movie, James Bond movie soundtrack to get pressed to vinyl for years. And it was Timothy Dalton's last outing, his second outing and last outing as James Bond in License to Kill. And this music was scored by Mr. Michael Kamen, who had just previously, I believe, had done the first Batman film starring Michael Keaton. So Michael Kamen was an up-and-coming composer, scorer, and he would do the music here in License to Kill and put his spin on scoring a James Bond film. And this had an absolutely spectacular theme song, License to Kill, performed by Miss Gladys Knight. Gladys Knight performing License to Kill. And this would be the last album, the last Bond film to appear on vinyl for many, many, many years to come. The next film to come out would be GoldenEye, 6 years later in 1995. And it has only ever been released on CD. And it was a soundtrack. This is an example of a soundtrack you just can't listen to by itself. It just doesn't make sense. Not my favorite soundtrack. The music fits perfectly with the film, but as a spin by itself, doesn't make much sense. And this was performed by a composer by the name of Eric Serra. That's right, Eric Serra did this film, but it did spawn a great single. It did spawn a great single called GoldenEye, performed by Miss Tina Turner. Tina Turner performed the GoldenEye theme song, but alas, only available on CD at the moment, never been pressed on vinyl. The next movie up has an interesting story, and that story is that at this point we're now at 1997, and I had been a Bond fan for 30 years at that point. 30 years as a Bond fan. And there was a contest, a radio contest here in Toronto called Do Your Best Bond, which my friend said, Anthony, you're a big Bond fan. You should enter the contest. And what they wanted you to do is send in a picture of yourself dressed up like James Bond, doing something Bondy. Of course, I did. I put a tuxedo on. I had my Bond collection memorabilia all around me. Sent it in, and of course, I won the radio contest along with another 10 Bond lookalikes, and was invited to a very special event at Planet Hollywood, Toronto. And it was to promote the film Tomorrow Never Dies. And I went there, and I went there as James Bond. That's right, I went there as James Bond. The minute I walked into the place with my 2 Bond girls on my arm, in my tuxedo, I walked into the place and was greeted as Mr. Bond. Good evening, Mr. Bond. Handed a martini, shaken not stirred, and taken to a table. And I actually had to do a performance, a performance on stage with my Bond girls, as well as all the contestants did. And in the end of the night, all the contestants that did their Bond impressions, we all got these fabulous press kits, got posters, got soundtrack, and I'll show you that in a second, soundtracks. And we got these fabulous press kits that had stills of the movie. You know, it had the 8x10 glossies, and notes about the film, this press kit, fabulous press kit. And of course, I will show you those. And of course, the highlight, of course, being invited to the premiere of Tomorrow Never Dies, private premiere, the first time it screened. My invitation to premiere blew my mind after being a collector for 30 years, a big thrill. I went to the private premiere with, of course, the directors and actors, and everybody was there. And here's some pictures. Here's some pictures of me that the people took. There's all the Bonds. I am right here under my finger there. All the different James Bonds. doing their Bond thing. All the Bonds. And here I am. Here I am. Yep, that's me, James Bond. Anthony Bond. Right there, James Bond, doing my Bond at Planet Hollywood. Once again, doing my Bond at Planet Hollywood. A much younger Anthony doing my Bond at Planet Hollywood. There I am, James Bond. I would get all this great stuff, get to go to the premiere of the movie, and I would get this LP here. And it's not an LP, it's a 12-inch single. It's the James Bond theme performed by Moby as it appeared in that film, Tomorrow Never Dies. And I got this at that night of being Mr. Bond, James Bond by Moby, from 1997, the 12-inch single. And of course, that album also was not released on vinyl to this day. And there were two different versions of the score with different tracks on them. It was released in two different formats, on CD only. Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997. And that score was done by a man by the name of David Arnold, who would then score the next 4 films. And he did the films in the tradition of John Barry. Booming sounds, fantastic sounds. And he would release an album also in 1997, at the same time as doing the just before Tomorrow Never Dies released. He released this album, which I'd love to see released on vinyl one day, called Shaken and Stirred, the David Arnold James Bond project, where he went back and explored some of the classic themes from James Bond films and got some modern performers, and he scored them. He did modern, upbeat versions of the songs and got modern, at that time, performers to perform things such as Amy Mann doing Nobody Does It Better, Left Field doing the Space March, Chrissie Hynde doing Live and Let Die, Martin Fry doing Thunderball, the Propellerheads doing On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Iggy Pop doing We Have All the Time in the World, and of course the Propellerheads On Her Majesty's Service became the single from that album. So David Arnold became the next best thing to John Barry, and he would score that album. Then in 1999, he would do The World Is Not Enough, also still not available on vinyl. And of course, the World Is Not Enough theme song was performed by Garbage, but right now only available on CD. And then his next outing would be Die Another Day from 2002. And he would score that film, also not available on vinyl to this date, the score. But there's Die Another Day, performed by David Arnold. And of course, Madonna would do the theme song to that movie, Die Another Day, done by Madonna. And then David Arnold's last outing, I believe his last outing, no, second last outing, David Arnold's next outing would be the first of the Daniel Craig films, Casino Royale. David Arnold would do Casino Royale. And for some reason, and this is one thing that's amazed me, this would be the start of not putting the theme song on the soundtrack album, which was just so annoying. They would do all the incidental music, but they wouldn't include the theme song. I don't know what they're thinking. Wouldn't include the theme song on the soundtrack album. And this was the first one to do that, because Die Another Day was on. But yeah, with Casino Royale and the Daniel Craig films, the actual title track for the film was not included on the soundtrack, also not ever available on CD, which they would then release an EP with additional music. Additional music would be released on an EP after the first soundtrack. But the title track, done by Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, would only be released as a single, as a CD single. You Know My Name. So all of these still not available on vinyl. And then things would follow suit. The same thing would follow suit. Next up was Quantum of Solace. Quantum of Solace. The last one scored by Mr. David Arnold. Quantum of Solace. Not a bad spin, but not his best. And of course, the title song was performed by Alicia Keys, Another Way to Die, which would at least be included on this soundtrack. Quantum of Solace, and of course it was from 2008. Then next up would become Skyfall in 2012. Skyfall on the 50th anniversary of James Bond. Skyfall and a new composer by the name of Thomas Newman, which I've got, I don't know why I'm showing you that. Skyfall would be the return to vinyl. That's right, Skyfall, the return to vinyl. And scored by Thomas Newman, and honestly, great music in the movie, but to listen to this record by itself, not so great. This is a typical example of music that sounds great when you're watching a movie, but by itself, not so much. Just doesn't have the same impact. Thomas Newman would score this one and the next film, Skyfall, and this is of course the first pressing of Skyfall, and this is a numbered, hand-numbered pressing, and they did this crazy thing on the inside gatefold of having this thing like a pop-up. It was a pop-up thing. 2 LPs, 4 sides of music, but not one of my favorite albums in the series. And of course, Skyfall would not include, and this album would not include the title track. Like, what are they thinking? This would not include the title track, which was performed and not available currently on vinyl, was performed by Adele. Skyfall, performed by Adele, a fantastic theme song, but alas, only available as a CD single. Last but not least would be Spectre from 2015, 5 years ago. Spectre, another double album by Thomas Newman, scoring the film, but like I said before, not a great spin to listen to by itself, in my opinion. But nonetheless, Thomas Newman, Spectre, and that is all of the soundtracks that are available on vinyl. Like I said, there was a big gap in there from GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, Casino Royale, and Quantum of Solace, all never being released on vinyl. I hope one day they do, so I could at least have them all on vinyl. That is all the soundtracks available on vinyl. Also from Spectre, before I get to that, of course, another case, just like Skyfall, where they never put the theme song on the album. Spectre was the same, never put the theme to Spectre on the album. Sam Smith, of course, doing Writings on the Wall, which was the theme to Spectre. In my opinion, the worst theme song of all of Bond movies. But that's my opinion. Sam Smith doing Spectre. The Writings on the Wall from Spectre. So to finish things off, I'm going to show you a little pile here really quickly, what they call tribute albums that have been released over the years that I've collected up in various places. And they're all pretty good. The first one is Roland Shaw and his orchestra. And this was from back in, I believe, 1965-ish era. James Bond thrillers, where he just basically did the first 4 films, for 3 films. Goldfinger, From Russia with Love, Dr. No, tribute album, performing some of the various themes from those films. And this is a really good spin. It's an original press. Another odd thing here. This is music from The Spy Who Loved Me and other great Bond thrillers performed by the Film Festival Orchestra. Another tribute album released, I believe, in 1977. Next up, one of my favorites, because they did a different spin on the things. This is Frank Purcell. Frank Purcell, a French composer, did his spin, and I really like this album. It's completely different sounding than all the other tribute albums, really laid back. And this was from everything from Live and Let Die and before. And this came out in 1973. And this is another first press on Studio 2 stereo. Frank Purcell, James Bond's greatest hits. Frank Purcell and his orchestra. One of my favorites of all of the tribute albums is Roland Shaw again, and The Return of James Bond. And this was everything from Diamonds Are Forever back to the beginning. A tribute album called The Return of James Bond, which the first 2 sides, it's a double album, and the first 2 sides were all songs all music from the James Bond films, And then the next two sides were other spy things, such as the theme from The Avengers, the theme from The Saint, the theme from I Spy, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Mission Impossible, Peter Gunn, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Icarus File, Wednesday's Child, and Our Man Flint. This is a really great spin, done in the tradition of John Barry's films. Really great spin, a real favorite of mine for a tribute album, and a must-have. Return of James Bond. Another one, the 007 Orchestra, doing James Bond thrillers, and I found this in a flea market about 2 years ago, still sealed, from 1965, never opened. I took the shrink off and played it, so it is in mint, and it is a really strange album because there's only 2 songs here that were, or 3 songs that were actually from the films, and then the rest of the songs were written in the spirit of James Bond. So a bizarre album, James Bond thrillers, and by the 007 Orchestra. Then a recent release, Penelope Sigh, and this is a jazz version. This is like a lounge jazz version by a lounge jazz singer by the name of Penelope Sigh, and she does some of the classic themes: Vito Kill, Goldfinger, Nobody Does It Better, Your Free Eyes Only, Diamonds Are Forever, Thunderball, From Russia With Love, Never Say Never, and Skyfall. And this is a really interesting jazz spin. It's definitely a jazz LP, very jazzy, loud and singing. Penelope Sigh sings 007. And last but not least, a man who's been doing the, well, not last but not least, but almost, a man that's been doing the Bond films traditionally, trying to do the music from the Bond films traditionally, and he's released these albums, and he always updates the albums. He's released the albums a number of times over the years, and each time a new film comes out, he adds to them and does a few songs from that film. It's Nick North and the City of Prague, Nick Rain and the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and this was only released in Japan, and it's called It's Bond and Beyond Volume 1, various themes from the Bond films from a couple of years ago, and there was a Volume 2 as well from a couple of years ago, various themes from the Bond films, and he currently has just released yet another version of these albums on vinyl, which I have not got yet, and I have actually put in an order for. And last but not least, from Record Store Day a couple of years ago, we've got George Martin's Beatles to Bond and Bach. And on this album, this was a Record Store Day release, and on this album he did the Bond Suite, which featured the James Bond theme, Whisper Who Dares, Bond Meets Oliver, and Live and Let Die. So it was a little medley of the songs he had done for Live and Let Die. Then he did some classic music like Air on the G Strings. And then he did a Beatles suite, which had Sgt. Pepper, Lucy in the Sky, and Day in the Life. And then he did a Yellow Submarine suite. But he did a Bond suite on this. Beatles to Bond and Bach, George Martin. That's it. That's all. This is the longest video I've ever recorded. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. I might split this video into 2 videos if need be, because I am running close to an hour of talking here. There was so much to show you. So I will decide on upload whether I'm going to split this video into 2 parts and release them together. And if that's the case, I hope you enjoyed both these videos. If I leave it as one, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Comments welcome down below. Don't forget to turn that notification bell thing on so you don't miss my videos. Thanks to all my subscribers who continue to join my channel. And I will see you all next week. Don't forget, my Instagram is @AGK_lifetime of vinyl, where I try to post a spin of the day every day. This was a big one, but I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you all real soon. AGK will return.